حي على الفلاح.
Officially the Republic of Chad. Chad is bordered by Sudan to the east, the Central African Republic to the south, Cameroon and Nigeria to the southwest, Niger to the west, and Libya to the north. It is landlocked and is in Central Africa. It is often referred to as the dead heart of Africa due to its distance from the sea and desert climate. Chad has a long and colorful history, dating all the way back to the 7th millennium BC, when human populations began migrating to the area. By the last years of the 1st millennium BC, a range of empires and states had been established in the Sahelian sectors of the country, which were actively involved in trans-Saharan trade. The earliest presence of Islam in Chad can be traced back to the legendary Uqba ibn Nafi R, whose descendants can be found settled in the Lake Chad region to this day. By the time Arab migrants began arriving from the east in the 14th century in sizable numbers, the creed was already well established. Instead of being the product of conquest or the imposition of political power, Islamization in Chad was gradual, the effect of the slow spread of Islamic civilization beyond its political frontiers. The Chadian basin has been inhabited for more than 2,000 years by agricultural peoples. It became a crossroads of civilization. The Sao were the first, known for their artifacts and oral history. The Kanem Empire overthrew the Sao and became the first of the empires in Chad's Sahelian trip. The Kanem and its successor kingdoms based on the control of the Saharan trade routes passing through the area. The kingdoms did not expand their borders to southern areas except to raid for servants. Ancestors play an important role in Chadian classical religions. They are thought to span the gap between the supernatural and natural worlds. They connect these two worlds specifically by linking living lineage members with their earliest forebears. Because of their proximity and because they once walked among the living, ancestors are prone to intervene in daily affairs. This intervention is particularly likely in the case of the recently deceased, who are thought to spend weeks or months in limbo between the living and the dead. Many religious observances include special rituals to propitiate these spirits, encourage them to take their leave with serenity, and restore the social order and their deaths have disrupted. Most classical African religions involve belief in a supreme being who created the world and its inhabitants, but who then retired from active intervention in human affairs. As a result, shrines to a high god are uncommon, and people tend to appeal to the lesser spirits. Yet the notion of a supreme being may have helped the spread of Christianity. When missionaries arrived in southern Chad, they often used the local name of this high god to refer to the Christian supreme being. Thus, although a much more interventionist spirit, the Christian god was recognizable to the people. This recognition probably facilitated conversion, but it may also have ironically encouraged syncretism, a practice disturbing to many missionaries and to Protestants in particular. Followers of classical African religions would probably not perceive any necessary contradiction between accepting the Christian God and continuing to believe in the spirits just described. The first carriers of Islam into the Chad basin were Islamized Berbers as early as the 11th century, long before an Arab presence was reported in the area. Islam was firmly anchored among the ruling elites of Kanem-Bornu. Some 3 centuries later, however, Arabs emerged as the principal vector of the new religion. At the end of the 16th century, Baguirmi claimed hundreds of converts, as did Wadai a century later. In both states, as in Kanem-Bornu, Islam was at first an urban-based religion confined to the ruling elites, notables and scholars, ulama. By then, Islam had long ceased to be the hallmark of Arab elements. A long heritage of intermarriage between Arabs and non-Arabs, coupled with the gradual expansion of Islam among non-Arab communities, resulted in a social landscape in which Arab influences were no longer predominant. Instead of being the product of conquest or the imposition of political power, Islamization in Chad was gradual. The effect of the slow spread of Islamic civilization beyond its political frontiers. Islam in Chad has adapted to its local context in many ways. For one thing, despite the presence of a large number of Arabs, Arabic is not the maternal language of the majority of Chadian Muslims. As a result, although many Chadian Muslims have attended Quranic schools, they often have learned to recite Quranic verses without understanding their meaning. Hence, perhaps even more than among those who understand Arabic, the recitation of verse has taken on a mystical character among Chadian Muslims. Islam in Chad also is syncretic. Chadian Muslims have retained and combined pre-Islamic with Islamic rituals and beliefs. Beginning in the Middle East in the 13th century, Muslim mystics sought to complement the intellectual comprehension of Islam with direct religious experience through prayer, contemplation, and action. The followers of these mystics founded brotherhoods, which institutionalized their teachers' interpretations of the faith. Such organizations stimulated the spread of Islam and also provided opportunities for joint action. For the most part, which was not the case in Chad, where only two brotherhoods exist. Perhaps as a result of prolonged contact with West African Muslim traders and pilgrims, most Chadian Muslims identify with the Tijaniya order, but the brotherhood has not served as a rallying point for unified action. Similarly, the Sanusiya, a brotherhood founded in Libya in the mid-19th century, enjoyed substantial economic and political influence in the Lake Chad Basin around 1900. Despite French fears of an Islamic revival movement led by Sanusi fanatics, Chadian adherents limited to the Awlad Suleiman Arabs and the Tobu of Eastern Tibesti have never been numerous. Chappell writes that even though Chadian Islam adheres to the Maliki legal school, most Islamic education relies solely on the Quran. Thus, serious Islamic students and scholars must go abroad. Popular destinations include Khartoum and Cairo, where numerous Chadians attend Al-Azhar, the most renowned university in the Islamic world. Chadian observance of the 5 pillars of the faith differs somewhat from the Orthodox tradition. For example, Chadian Muslims probably make the pilgrimage less often than, for example, their Hausa counterparts in northern Nigeria. Rural Islam in Chad remains highly syncretistic and permeated by pre-Islamic beliefs and practices. The phenomenon is nowhere more evident than among the Tubu people of the Tibesti, whose conversion to Islam occurred at a rather late date, late 19th century, as a result of their sporadic contacts with the Sanusiya. The significance of the brotherhoods lies in their remarkable adaptability to indigenous power structures, and with few exceptions in their unrelenting opposition to colonial rule. This is where the history of the Sanusiya merits particular attention. Besides its sustained resistance to French penetration in the Tibesti, culminating the bloody battles of Bir Alali and Ain Galaka, one must stress the psychological impact these encounters had on French attitudes towards the Brotherhood. In the minds of many French administrators, the Sanusiya emerged as the incarnation of evil, the vehicle through which the twin dangers of pan-Islamism and pan-Arabism threatened to undermine France's civilizing mission in the heart of the continent, while never missing an opportunity to play one brotherhood off against another. The French went to great lengths to make Islam safe for colonial rule by diffusing its pan-Islamic and bringing it firmly under the control of the traditional sultans. Nonetheless, the legacy of conflict between the forces of Islam and France's colonial enterprise is a key factor behind the striking reversal of developmental patterns that has accompanied the intrusion of Western influences. Until the arrival of the French, the Islamic North was far more advanced than the animist South in both the scale and character of its political, economic, commercial, and cultural activities. By the end of colonial period, However, the now predominantly Christian South, tellingly referred to by the French as Le Tchad utile, useful Chad, had emerged as conspicuously more developed socially, economically, and politically. Predictably, the country ascended to independence, 1960, under the control of a southern, Sahara-dominated government headed by Francois Tombalbaye. But if the South inherited the political kingdom, the systematic inclusion of Muslim elements from all positions of authority soon paved way for the bloody rebellion that broke out at Mangalme in November 1965. Although the immediate cause of the Northern Rebellion is traceable to the forced collection of taxes at a rate substantially beyond the capabilities of the local taxpayers, for a while, Islam provided a powerful unifying bond among otherwise diverse ethnic and regional communities. It also gave Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi a convenient pretext for coming to the assistance of his Muslim brothers against the neo-colonialist regime of Tombalbaye and his French allies. In the end, France's protracted military involvement on the side of the Chadian government proved utterly ineffective. In coming to terms with the roots of the insurgency, the same applies to Tombalbaye's attempt in 1971 to enlist the cooperation of the traditional sultans of Wadai, Kanem, and Bagurmi as a counterweight to the rebel leadership of the Front de Liberation National du Tchad, followed by his belated overture to Libya in 1972 that led to the exchange of ambassadors with that state and the severance of diplomatic relations with Israel. The return of the Frolinat warlord Hissène Habré to N'Djamena in June 1986 brought to a close the long-drawn-out trial of strength between North and South. Habré's victory, however, can hardly be described as emblematic of a triumphant Islam. Although it provided initial social ballast for the rebellion, Islam proved a remarkably feeble counterweight to the divisive forces of ethnicity and regionalism. Islamic revivalism is now emerging as a powerful source of solidarity among middle and lower class Muslim elements in N'Djamena, echoing the preaching of Hassan Hussein, Imam of the Grand Mosque. Many insist that the only path to salvation is through the Sharia, the study of the Quran in schools, and the recruitment of educated Muslims into government and the civil service. Islamic has been bolstered of Hassan al-Turabi's National Islamic Front, operating from the Darfur province in western Sudan, and has become a significant piece on the Chadian chessboard. Its growing appeal among Muslims lies both in the attraction of its ideological worldview and their conviction that it offers the only viable solution to Chad's endless crisis. In 1993, 54% of the country was Muslim, 20% Roman Catholic, 14% Protestant, 10% animist, and 3% atheist. Most of the religions have diverse practices, many that have come from animist beliefs. Muslims live primarily in the north, and the Christians live primarily in the south. Religious freedom is guaranteed in the constitution, and generally all faiths coexist. Most Muslims in Chad are part of Tijaniya, which uses some elements of traditional beliefs. Most Christians are Roman Catholic, and Protestants are affiliated with evangelical groups. Jehovah's Witnesses and Baha'i are also in the country, but were introduced after independence.